The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, thank you for coming today. Today is a pretty special day. We're going to speak about Harmony, Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I have a very heavy bias in favor of Pennsylvania. I'll just disclose that right now. And I lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania for 2 years. I clerked in a federal courthouse there, and that is where I've got most of the material for this presentation is generated from that experience. So today we're going to learn about Joseph Smith and how he built the foundation of the church in Harmony, Pennsylvania. He received 15 significant revelations. He translated the majority of the Book of Mormon, and he met his wife, Emma, all in Harmony, Pennsylvania. First, I'm going to do a quick recap from what we talked about yesterday, and also a little bit, just tell you a little bit about me. If you were here yesterday, you learned a little bit, but if you weren't, you can learn a bit more. So I went to Brigham Young University. I was on the 1997 men's gymnastics team, and this was our team photo, and they told us to look really serious. And so I did my best as a freshman on the team to look serious, and you can see me right there, and that is as serious as I can get. Well, they decided to drop the gymnastics team, and so I ended up playing football as a kicker. And so this is me at my last home game in 2003. And instead of being serious, which you should be as a football player, I'm smiling. And if you're a good football player, you don't smile. You're very serious. But you can see this photo is actually, you can see the visiting stands. This is LaVell Edwards Stadium. So can you see who our opponent was? And we lost 0-3. That's the first shutout BYU's ever had against the U. Anyway, so not a very good to end my football career, but it was never meant to be anyway. So yesterday we talked about the miracle of the Constitution. We talked about that it's an inspired document. And these brethren here, these men, we went through their statements and quotes about the Constitution. And I think at the end of our meeting yesterday, we all believed, yes, it's an inspired document. Yes, it was an absolute miracle. We also talked about the convention at Philadelphia, and we learned who all the people are in this painting. And we learned that Thomas Jefferson's not in there, and neither is John Adams, because one was in Paris and the other was in London. And we learned that it was not easy for them to find a compromise, but they did. And we learned that Benjamin Franklin played a key part in that, and so did George Washington, and that it truly was a miracle that these delegates came together to create one of the greatest documents of this time. So today we're going to shift gears just a little bit. We're going to talk about one of the founders of America, and we're going to talk about one colony. We're going to talk about William Penn in Pennsylvania, and we're going to learn about Joseph's experience in Harmony and how that was influenced by William Penn and Pennsylvania's laws and policies. So almost 150 years before Joseph arrived in Harmony, William Penn founded the colony of Pennsylvania based on religious freedom. And William Penn didn't use the words religious freedom. He used the words liberty of conscience, which means religious freedom. And Pennsylvania, this culture, society, everything permeated religious freedom. Its system of government, and Pennsylvania actually protected religious freedom. And we're going to look at the constitutions of Pennsylvania and other colonies later on, more than any other colony at that time. And some historians and legal scholars have called Pennsylvania, the colony of Pennsylvania, the most religiously liberal colony to ratify the United States Constitution. And we're going to talk about how that helped Joseph Smith. So to start out, we're going to tell the story of Joseph Smith, and we're going to tell the story of William Penn. And I want you to just kind of feel their stories, live their stories with them, and see the parallels between their stories, because I believe each one was inspired by God. But first, let's talk about the restoration of the the priesthood restoration site when it was dedicated on September 19th, 2015. Then President of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, Russell Nelson, dedicated the Harmony site, and he called it a place of faith, a place of prayer, a place of learning, a place of glory, indeed a place of holiness. And then he said, as we have quoted there, Harmony provided Joseph with spiritual solitude and protection, allowing him to focus on translation of the Book of Mormon. So we're going to talk about that spiritual solitude and protection that Joseph had while he was in Harmony, Pennsylvania, just what President Nelson was talking about. So first, we're going to go back to their stories now. So William Penn said the Lord appeared to him. Joseph Smith said the Lord appeared to him. So William Penn, as a young boy, he grew up in London, and he was very sensitive to the spirit and had an active mind. He started school at the age of 9 at Chigwell in England, which is a northeastern suburb of London. At the age of 12, William said the Lord appeared to him when he was alone in his room at Chigwell. He said this, "The Lord first appeared to me about the 12th year of my age and gave me divine impressions of myself." Although William recorded that the Lord reproved him for his sins, he said the heavenly visitation provided him a certain sound testimony and understanding of the eternal word, and that William knew he was preserved for a divine purpose. This experience inspired William to reject his noble heritage, to reject the heritage of his father and pursue what would eventually become the colony of Pennsylvania. So Joseph Smith, like William, sought spiritual enlightenment at a young age. While living in Palmyra, New York, at the age of 14, he became troubled about the subject of religion, and he regularly attended Methodist circuit rider meetings, Methodist preachers who would come through the Palmyra area. So according to his brother, William Smith, George Lane, a Methodist preacher, came in through the area and preached a sermon on what church shall I join? And he mentioned James 1:5. So if we believe William Smith's account, Joseph's brother, George Lane may have awakened something in Joseph to go and inquire. Well, Joseph did read in James 1:5, as we all know, and that passage marked him. And he said, Joseph recalled, never did any passage of scripture come with more power to the heart of man than did this at this time to mine. So Joseph concluded he needed to go pray. He went and prayed and inquired of the Lord one spring morning in 1820. He went in a grove of trees and with a burning question, what church should I join? And he experienced what we call the first vision, the appearance of God the Father and Jesus Christ. He waited a while for further direction after that experience. And during that time, he came upon some seer stones. This is a picture of one of the seer stones that is in custody of the church. And sometimes Joseph associated with a company of money diggers in the neighborhood. Glass looking is what they called it. And it seems odd to us today, this money looking, but back in the early Americas, looking for hidden treasure in Spanish explorers where they put things was really popular. And we even see people with metal detectors out on the beaches today. So I guess it's maybe not that foreign today. But that was a big thing then. So he did have a seer stone, and he was known for his talent with the seer stone. Joseph's dad said he thought his son's gift was a wonderful triumph as a seer, but his father did not approve of Joseph using it for treasure seeking. His dad always thought that God had a miracle for Joseph to perform with his talent. Joseph never denied participating in these money digging excursions, or whatever you want to call them, but he did regret, I think, his treasure seeking tendencies. So 3 years passed. We get to September 21st, 1823. Joseph is praying in his room, and the angel Moroni appears to him 4 times during that night and tells him to go to the hill Cumorah. Joseph goes to the hill Cumorah, and there the angel Moroni shows him these plates. And Joseph tries to take the plates, but is not able to. He says temptation beset him, and his mind became filled with the pecuniary, the money value of the plates. His family was poor. This would be a great benefit for them. So he was not essentially ready to take the plates. And so he went back from the hill without the plates. So we're going to go back to William Penn now. We're going to hop back and forth between the figures. So William Penn, we're going to talk about faith in foreign lands. So William Penn goes to Ireland. He converts to Quakerism. Joseph Smith goes to Pennsylvania and finds more Methodism, or the Hale family, which is very much Methodist. So it was the summer of 1667, and William's father asked him to go to Ireland. And so he goes to a Quaker meeting, and he converts to Quakerism. This is exactly what William Penn's been looking for. So a soldier enters a meeting that William's attending and causes a great disturbance. William grabs the soldier by the collar, and several others kind of push him out the door or something along those lines. And William gets put in prison. And you'll notice that William and Joseph both had a lot of encounters with the law. That's a big part of their story. I think it's a big part of any religious pioneer's story, is these encounters with the law, and we'll talk about it. So while in Cork jail, William wrote his first statement on the defense of religious freedom, or on liberty of conscience. So when William discovered Quakerism in Ireland, Joseph encountered Methodism when he went to Harmony, Pennsylvania. So he was sought out because of his skill with treasure seeking by a man named Josiah Stowell, who was looking for treasure in Harmony, Pennsylvania. So he hired Joseph and his father, and in 1825, they went down to Harmony to look for treasure. This is a picture I took of what they think might be, it's pure speculation, but it might be a silver mine or might be a mine in Pennsylvania. It's on some private property close to the restoration site, so you can't really go visit it, but some people told me where to go look, and I went and found it. And that's it. And you can look at the inside here. They say that might be a treasure digging place, but who knows? So after 3 weeks with Josiah Stowell, Joseph convinced him that this was not a good effort, that he was not going to find any treasure, and so that stopped. But unfortunately, that created many rumors of money digging for Joseph Smith and Harmony. But that was how he initially found Harmony, but how he eventually encountered Harmony. While he was in Harmony, he boarded with the Hale family. Now, Harmony was a much wilder frontier than Palmyra. So the immigrants who came to the colonies of Pennsylvania were deeply religious, and Methodism had a deep spot in Harmony, Pennsylvania. So the Hale family was one of the first families to settle in Pennsylvania in Harmony. Isaac Hale, Emma's father, was a mighty hunter and a prominent member of the community, and later actually offered protection to Joseph while Joseph translated the plates. He had 9 children, and Emma was the 7th of 9, and she was raised in Susquehanna in Harmony. The Hale family was very closely involved in politics. In fact, Alva Hale, one of Isaac's sons, served as town constable, which is essentially the law enforcement officer of Harmony. And so that's another protection that Joseph may have had in Harmony, is this, his wife's brother is essentially the prosecutor of the town. But if tensions are bad, that may not be a good thing too, right? So he met Emma, and he immediately fell in love with her, as the story goes, and they started courting, and eventually they got married, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Inspired texts. So this is the next parallel I'd like to draw between William and Joseph. So William was imprisoned in the Tower of London. He wrote a treatise called No Cross, No Crown. And then obviously Joseph in Harmony started translation of the Book of Mormon. So it was 1688, and William Penn wrote his first pamphlet on the Quaker faith. And he said, God knows us personally. And when he published the pamphlet, he was arrested and imprisoned in England. And he was in the Tower of London, is where he was imprisoned. You may have visited it. It's a very popular tourist site in London. And while he was incarcerated, he wrote "No Cross, No Crown," and wrote important statements about Christ. And the cross and the crown are obviously references to Christ. The cross where Christ was crucified, the crown that he wore. And Penn's theory was you have to first have the cross, the burden, the sacrifice, before you get the reward, which is the crown. So if you don't have a cross, then you don't have a crown. No cross, no crown. This was his book, and it actually became a very well-known essay on Christ at the time, and for the Quakers. So Joseph, like we talked about, he eventually got married. This is a picture of where he was married. He eloped to New York, and the house is no longer there where Emma and he were married, but they do have this sign at the Afton Fairgrounds, where Joseph was morried. This may have caused some friction between Joseph and his father-in-law. So we fast forward 7 years from that visit from Angel Moroni, and 7 years from the first vision, and that's when Joseph finally gets the plates. And Emma accompanied him as he went to the Hill Cumorah. The Angel Moroni gave him a very strict charge with the plates, and it's important to remember this. He said this, Moroni said this, that I should be responsible for the plates, that if I should let them go carelessly or through any neglect of mine, I should be cut off. But that if I would use all my efforts to preserve them until he, the messenger, should call them, then they should be protected. And we know from many accounts that once Joseph had the plates, the persecution intensified. It was a lightning rod. Everyone from all over came after him to take the plates. So he stayed maybe a month or two in New York, if that. The persecution became intense, so he and Emma went down to Harmony, Pennsylvania. And if you remember, on their way down, they were stopped by two constables who searched their wagon for these plates in New York. Now, it's my theory that once they crossed into Pennsylvania, they didn't get searched because Alva Hale was the constable. And so I don't see him searching his sister and her husband as they're coming into the area. But I think in New York, they were still running after him. So they come down to Harmony. They stay in the Hale's house for the first little bit. It gets a little bit, probably close quarters. Joseph says he can't show the plates to anyone. So eventually they move out into this smaller home that's just right near the Hale home. And so Joseph immediately started translating the plates. A lot of that occurred in this home. He didn't have a full-time scribe or assistant. So eventually Martin Harris arrived, and they started into the Book of Lehi. That was from about April 12th to June 14th or 15th of 1828, roughly a 2-month period. And they translated those 116 pages from the Book of Lehi. So we're going to go back to William. So William was in jail. He ended up getting out of jail. And now we're going to talk about some other trials William experienced. So he continued, William, to preach the Quaker faith. And one time he was outside a Quaker meeting house on London's Grace Street Church with another Quaker named William Mead, and they were arrested for disturbing the peace. Back then in London, in England, they did not have protection for juries. So the jury came back, we call it a hung jury. So it was 4 on one side, 8 on one side, and 4 on the other. So they couldn't convict him. It required, a unanimous, all the jurors to agree. But there was no protection of the jury, so the judge and the sheriff sent the jury back and said, no, we're not going to take that. You need to go back and decide. So the jury went back. They came back, and they finally, I think it happened 2 or 3 times, they finally found William Penn and William E. guilty of speaking in Grace Church Street, which is not a crime and not a charge against them. And William was furious. He was fighting against it. So now we understand a little bit what he was up against because of his Quaker faith. So he gets out of that jail, and then he gets in jail again in February 1671 for preaching at another meeting house, or near another meeting house. And this time, while he was in jail, back in the Tower of London, by the way, William expanded and refined an epistle he had written called The Great Case of Liberty of Conscience. And this is how he defined liberty of conscience: the free and uninterrupted exercise of our consciences, and that way of worship we are most clearly persuaded God requires us to serve him in, which without endangering our undoubted birthright of English freedoms, which being a matter of faith, we sin if we admit, and they can't do less, they shall not endeavor it. In other words, it's complete freedom to exercise one's conscience, one's religion. So those were pretty tough trials for Penn. He's from this noble heritage, and he just keeps getting in jail. His dad is pretty ashamed of him for denying his noble heritage and just kind of being with the nobles. But Penn really had something he wanted to accomplish. So these were pretty difficult moments for Penn. And I think Joseph also had some difficult experiences at this time, and I call these Joseph's trials of 1828. So this is a picture of the son that was born to Emma on June 5th, 1828, and Emma and Joseph, and was either stillborn or died shortly thereafter. And this is the gravestone in that cemetery in Harmony that's been encapsulated by a bigger stone to preserve it. But this was very difficult when the child died. This was at the same time where Joseph had let Martin Harris go up to Palmyra with the manuscript after imploring God a few times. And also Emma became in very poor health after the birth. So he's got this all weighing on him. And I can't imagine what he was experiencing. So Emma starts to get better, and Emma says, all right, go Joseph, go check out, see what Martin Harris did with this. Go try to find that manuscript. So he goes back to Palmyra, and the manuscript's gone. They can't find it. And then Joseph comes back to Harmony, very sad and very discouraged. So often miracles follow trials. So we just talked about these court issues that William had. We just talked about Joseph, his trials of 1828. Now we're going to see the miracles that produced in these men's lives. So William decided he was going to pursue his own colony of liberty of conscience. And this is the advertisement that he made to go to Pennsylvania. And so he wrestled and argued with kings and bureaucrats, 10 months of filings, hearings, bargaining, bureaucratic hurdles, and finally he got a charter for Pennsylvania, the colony of Pennsylvania. And he said this. He said he was inspired by God to establish the colony of Pennsylvania. God hath made it a matter, and this is Penn, quote, God hath made it a matter of religious exercise to my soul in getting and settling this land. And it is in the Lord's and to his service do I dedicate my days, in the help of his people here. I am not idle, I have not time for it, but good is the Lord to me in it all. My health and strength are continued and renewed. So William got to go to Pennsylvania. He founded the first laws of Pennsylvania. Here he is meeting the people and the Indians. He sailed on the ship Welcome to Pennsylvania. His trip lasted 8 weeks. 30 passengers and crew died from smallpox during the passage. And William just fell in love with Pennsylvania. If you read his letters, he just praises the beautiful trees and everything about Pennsylvania back to England. So after living in Pennsylvania for 2 years, William Penn had to return back to England because his charter was becoming in jeopardy. He was having battles with Lord Baltimore. There were all kinds of things going on. So he was very sad to leave Pennsylvania and go back to England. And this is one of the early drawings of the streets of Philadelphia. All right. So Penn finally succeeding in arranging the fairs of Pennsylvania, and he returned back and he was mediating quarrels, collecting taxes, doing everything he could to maintain the colony of Pennsylvania. He also maintained peaceful relationships with the local Indian tribes and directly handled negotiations with them. And he's known for his fair treatment of Indians much more than some of the other colonies. So to kind of sum up William Penn, he went back to Pennsylvania, was only there less than a year. Then he had to go back to England to continue to defend his charter, and he died in England. So he really didn't get to spend that much time in this beloved colony that he had created. But William's incessant efforts to secure political and religious liberty in Pennsylvania benefited thousands of minorities. Quakers, Presbyterians, Anglicans, Reformed, Lutherans, Mennonites, Baptists, and others found a place in Pennsylvania. William believed that religion unified the colony against disorder, and it promoted the common good. Religion would inspire individuals to be virtuous, and it was the government's interest to inspire individuals to virtuous living. William believed that God should be a part of government because both civil and natural laws come from God, but the religious truth was entirely individual, and the government should not interfere. So let's go back to Joseph Smith now in translation. We left him after his trials. Remember, we're going to say there's going to be a miracle after the trials. Well, there was a miracle after the trials. He did some translation with Emma as his scribe, and then on April 5th, 1829, Oliver Cowdery arrived in Harmony, and what a miracle. This was when he could finally have a dedicated scribe and get the work done. So Oliver and Joseph translated. They came up with a question about baptism. And as you may recall, on May 15th, 1829, they retired to the woods, and John the Baptist appeared to them and conferred upon them the Aaronic priesthood. And at that moment, Joseph and Oliver prophesied of the growth of the church. They were under the Spirit, and they just felt that this was a key moment, and we have seen that moment. We have seen the church go from the 6 members a year later from this prophecy of theirs to over 17 million members in 2020. So we've seen the fulfillment of the prophecies they made on the Susquehanna River. Now, we used to think that this baptism occurred, or that John the Baptist appeared on the banks of the Susquehanna, but recent research by Mark Staker, who's an historian of the church and just an incredible historian and scholar, said that it occurred in some maple trees further up on the site. And if you go to the Harmony site, you'll see that. But a pretty amazing discovery he made and on that. And then afterward, they received the Aaronic priesthood within the next few days or the next month. They received the Melchizedek priesthood. That one's not quite as accurately described in journals, so we don't know as much about it, but Peter, James, and John appeared to Oliver and Joseph. So again, the miracles followed the trial. So how is all this able to happen in Pennsylvania without any arrests, any imprisonments, any authorities coming at them? Well, let's just talk a little bit about Pennsylvania's constitutions and 2 cases in the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. So we'll just put on our lawyer hats just for a moment here as we dive into this stuff. So Pennsylvania's Constitution of 1776. So that was the same time as the Declaration of Independence. So this is their colonial constitution, and then after the U.S. Constitution was ratified, Pennsylvania did another update to their constitution in 1790. So we're looking at 2 different constitutions from Pennsylvania. They're largely the same. 1790 Constitution has a few changes, but not much to talk about. So the preamble of the Pennsylvania Constitution: God is the author of existence, who bestowed natural rights and blessings on the inhabitants of Pennsylvania. What a way to start your government. God is the author of existence. God is the great governor of the universe who alone knows to what degree of earthly happiness mankind may attain by perfecting the arts of government. I think we know where Pennsylvania stands on religion with that. All right, so they have a Bill of Rights in the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776, and the one of the rights is that you have all men have a natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God. So very important right, similar to the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. Okay, still with the 1776 Constitution. This article, we don't have to read the whole thing, but it's protects religious societies. So religious societies are protected and enjoy privileges in Pennsylvania. Okay, and then the 1790 Constitution actually maybe even added more protections to the 1776 one. So again, this right to worship the Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience. And then no human authority can control or interfere with the rights of conscience. I mean, this is gold. This language is gold. This really is strongly in favor of people exercising their religion and the state not interfering with their exercise. So I've looked at the Supreme Court cases, not the U.S. Supreme Court. We're talking about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Every state has its own laws and its own Supreme Court. And there's two cases that were handed down in the 1800s before Joseph Smith's arrival. And I don't think this timing is a coincidence. I think this is God inspiring men to prepare Pennsylvania for Joseph Smith. So Riddle v. Stevens, we're not going to get into the case, but essentially the ruling of the case, what the court said is church rules and discipline are not subject to state authority and have no place in the state. In the civil context, the state would not interfere with church law and respected the laws of church. So back in colonial America or in these remote settlements of Pennsylvania, often church law was more significant or authoritative than the state law, and the state respected that. So the church could deal with its members according to its own laws, and the state was not going to step in and interfere with that. And tomorrow we'll talk about a little bit about that more, but that's a key point in what happens to Joseph Smith. But I don't think I'm going to get to that today. But anyway, this is giving the church its own sphere of governance is a really key feature of this case. That's 1816. So we're still not to Joseph Smith's time. So 1824, this is the year before Joseph arrives in Harmony, 3 years before he gets there with the plates. So we're talking 1 year before he sets foot in Harmony. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania hands down this decision directly addressing religious freedom and invoking all the laws and policies of William Penn, literally citing everything William Penn cited. I feel like it's bringing William Penn from the 1600s and 1700s directly into 1824, right before Joseph Smith arrives. So they look at the Charter of the Providence of Pennsylvania, and that the first legislative act in the colony was the recognition of the Christian religion and establishment of liberty of conscience. And then they define liberty of conscience, just like William Penn did, that it gives men and women full reign, full ability to worship how they would like. And this was pretty much the final word of the case. Our own free constitution secures liberty of conscience and freedom of religious worship to all. So that's the premier case that the Supreme Court has issued before Joseph Smith arrives in Pennsylvania. Okay, so Joseph Smith finishes they're in the midst of translation. They experience some persecution in Harmony, and so they move to New York. They go there at the Whitmer farm. They arrive about on June 1st. When they settle in, Joseph continues translation of the upstairs. We think they probably did the small plates of Nephi, and then they complete the translation of the plates. So here's a little bit of the timeline of the timeline of completing the plates. It's estimated that Joseph probably translated the plates for about, or engaged in translation for 63 days. And that's what the scholars say. So that's essentially dictating 3,500 words per day. That's a lot for someone unschooled in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Obviously, it's a miracle. Obviously, it's only with God's help that he could do that in such a short period of time. And I can only imagine Joseph was saying, I'm not getting this work done. I've had these plates for how long? And it's just not happening. And in the last 2 months, he does the whole thing, right? Pretty much the whole thing does in the last 2 months, he has the plates. So he had a number of different scribes. You can find a lot of information on this online, but these are just a few of the ones I noted that were important for him. But definitely Emma was critical. Martin and Oliver could not have done it without them. And I know sometimes Martin gets a bad name, but he really believed in Joseph. He financed Joseph and he helped Joseph. So I give a lot of credit to Martin. So let's talk about the gold plates. I think, as I said before, having these plates in his possession must have been an extreme burden and not being able to show anyone. So when he was able to show the plates to the 3 witnesses, or I think Moroni did, and then he was able to show the plates to the 8 witnesses, what a burden that must have been lifted from him to be able to say, okay, now someone else can see I'm not crazy. Like they can now see, they know I have these plates. They have seen them as well. They are also witnesses. So let's talk about this possession, this timeline of possession. And I've been hinting at this. So after Joseph completed the translation after he completed the translation in Fayette, New York, he gave the plates back to Moroni, and that he must have been so excited to give the plates back. Thank you. No thanks anymore. You can keep them. All right. And so remember, he had the threat of it being cut off if he lost these plates. And so this graph right here is something I made. I put some citations in there so we know we're actually talking about real dates and times, and it's all estimated. But the question is, how many months did Joseph possess the plates? And of those months, how many were in Pennsylvania? So we know when he got the plates. I think it's September 22nd, 1827. That's pretty well recorded. He received the plates from the angel Moroni. And then it was within a month or two, he went to Harmony with Emma, right? And then he had the plates in Harmony. They were, I think the plates were temporarily moved a few times. It's not exactly clear. And then he had to leave Harmony for New York the end of May, June, because of the persecution. And so we think he returned, and according to the Joseph Smith papers, the end of June or July of 1829, he returned the plates. So we're looking at about, you can take a month or add a month, 22 months. So of those 22 months, we think he was probably 3 or 4 months in New York and probably 19 to 20 months in Pennsylvania. So when the protection was needed for the plates, he was in Pennsylvania. And I don't think we can emphasize enough how important it was to protect the plates. I won't speculate, but I assume it would have been very detrimental if those had been stolen by someone to the work of God and to what is now the keystone of our religion. So it really, and this shows my Pennsylvania bias again, but Pennsylvania stepped up when Joseph needed it. And there's many different reasons that he was able to protect the plates. We'll talk about in a minute, but he had to protect the plates, and Pennsylvania was there. So obviously he was able to print the Book of Mormon. This is the title page of it, and while the printing was going on, Joseph maintained his house in Harmony, Pennsylvania. So let's now look at Pennsylvania's constitution versus its colonial constitution versus the other colonial constitutions at the time. So there were 13 colonies, 12 had constitutions. Rhode Island did not. And you remember Rhode Island's the one that didn't show up at the convention. So Rhode Island's not doing very well right now with things. But yeah, so 12 of the 13 colonies, of 12 of them, 8 had a Declaration of Rights or a statement that's similar to the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. So we're going to put our legal hats back on, and we're going to actually just analyze a little bit these 12 colonial constitutions, and we won't go too deep into this. But so there's 6 methods that some scholars have said on how colonial constitutions protected religious rights. And so here's the 6 right now. They have a declaration of the right to worship, so you can worship. They have a protection of freedom of worship. So you have the freedom to worship, not only the right, but you can exercise that right. The freedom from compelled religious attendance. You don't have to go to one church or the other. You're free to choose. Freedom from compelled financial contribution. I think that one's clear. Laws respecting an establishment of religion. So did the constitutions protect churches from regulation or from laws controlling them? And then was there a religious test for political office? So those are the 6 ones we're going to look at, and we'll go through each one. I'll just tell you about Pennsylvania's constitution, and then we'll compare it to some of the other colonies. So the first one is a Declaration of Right to Worship. So in Pennsylvania's constitution, it declares all men have the natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God. Only 4 other colonies, Delaware, North Carolina, Vermont, and New Hampshire, provided that same protection, while 3 other colonies emphasized religious duties instead of rights. So Pennsylvania definitely afforded the most protection there. So the second method, protection of freedom of worship. So the Pennsylvania Constitution gave the absolute right to worship with no qualifications. Only Vermont and Delaware used the similar language. In contrast, New Jersey, Maryland, North Carolina, Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New York qualified the right. So it was not an absolute right. And if our First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is also an unqualified right. It's obviously been qualified by the U.S. Supreme Court, but it is an unqualified right. So number 3, freedom from compelled religious attendance. Some state constitution said that an individual could not be forced to go to church, and Pennsylvania did that. Most states did that. However, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina, and New York did not recognize this right to worship. Did not recognize the right not to worship. So in Pennsylvania and some other colonies, you had the right not to worship. Okay, freedom from compelled financial contributions. Many states had this right. Pennsylvania Constitution banned religious taxes, and many others followed that same approach for the financial contribution, but some states did not. Okay, so number 5, law respecting an establishment of religion. The Pennsylvania Constitution did not have specific language about this, but that did, as we talked about, protect religious societies. And so there are stronger protections that other states had. So that's probably the only category where Pennsylvania would rank not the most religiously liberal. And then the sixth one, a religious test for civil rights. So during the colonial era, generally it was required to be Christian in a lot of the colonies in order to hold political office. That was the test. You had to affirm the Old Testament or the New Testament or something along those lines. Pennsylvania was a little different. Pennsylvania required that you believe in God. So a little bit broader for more religions to believe in God. But again, Pennsylvania, I think, led the way in being the most religiously liberal. So overall, comparing these 12 different colonial constitutions, Pennsylvania generally afforded the most protection to religion and religious societies. So let's compare briefly now Pennsylvania's constitution to some other constitutions where Joseph Smith went after Pennsylvania. So we know he went to Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois, right? And so Pennsylvania, again, very religiously focused and we're just going to briefly go over this. We won't go into this in detail, but just to let you know, Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois were more focused on statehood, becoming a new state within the United States. And they also focus more on balance of powers between branches of governments, property rights. Other things seem to be more significant to these newer states rather than these colonial constitutions, which really recognized that they were there for religious freedom purposes. And we know that Joseph, after departing Harmony, experienced religious prejudice in those states. First in Ohio and then Missouri and Illinois. I mean, we know that, first of all, in Ohio, he had a number of lawsuits against him with the failure of the Kirkland Safety Society Bank. And he also had some false criminal charges brought against him. In Missouri, he was arrested for crimes of high treason. And obviously, we know the governor of Missouri issued an executive order directing that all Mormons must be exterminated. That's probably the most extreme form of religious prejudice you can have. And then in Illinois, he was charged with riot for closing the printing press. And he had a complaint of treason. I mean, there's just all kinds of religiously motivated prejudices that we see in these three states. And the conclusion was Joseph ultimately paid his life for his divine mandate and mission. So let's go through some conclusions. We've got about 7 minutes left of time. So where does this get us? Where does this get us? So in Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, Joseph encountered significant hostility in the form of lawsuits, arrests, trials because of his religious beliefs. Even in New York, remember he went back and forth between New York and Pennsylvania in those early years. And we didn't get into detail into these lawsuits, but even in New York, in 1826, he was charged as a disorderly person. In 1827, we talked about the two constables we think stopped him in New York. In 1829, he had a suit against him brought by Martin Harris's wife. And then also in 1829, he was imprisoned and tried in both Shenango County, New York, and in Broome County, New York. So you just see, I mean, New York definitely, they were out to get him a little bit. Now, they've been studying his Joseph Smith's lawsuits for a number of years and concluded that there's about 220 lawsuits he was in or experienced either as plaintiff, defendant, whatever it is. And my question to you is, how many of those lawsuits occurred in Pennsylvania of the 220? We'll get to that. All right, so why was Pennsylvania so unique? Pennsylvania's Constitution, William Penn and his policies, this Updegraff case, this Pennsylvania Supreme Court case, the Hales family protection, and also it was just remote. It was a little bit off the grid, so you can get things done when you're off the grid sometimes. So I think those are the reasons, and those aren't just by chance. God prepared this safety net, this place, this spiritual enclave, so Joseph Smith could do this. Now, I want to, this is actually my favorite. There's millions of papers on the Joseph Smith Papers website. If you go there, you can get lost and never come out. But this one's my favorite. And this is a contract between Isaac Hale and Joseph Smith. And you can see right here, here are their signatures right there, Joseph Smith and Isaac Hale. So this is the contract that Joseph entered to buy his house when he moved out of the Hale mansion into the little house next door on the property next door. And it's actually an installment contract. So they agreed Joseph would pay it was $200 for the property. The May 1st, he had a $114 payment due. Then he had an $86 payment due. And then if he was late, then It was a $400 penalty. And so he made the $64 down payment, and they speculate that it might have been Oliver who contributed that, because Oliver's teacher's salary was $65. And then at the end of April, he made another $50 payment, and they think he might have gotten that from Joseph Knight Sr., whom Joseph had worked for previously. And then he was late on the last payment, so he made instead of making the last payment, he made an interest payment. And then finally, he was able to pay it off by borrowing $86 from George Noble, a shopkeeper nearby in Pennsylvania. So that's how he paid this off. And the shopkeeper and Joseph went to court and had a non-adversarial judgment filed. And so that was so that Joseph agreed he would pay that $86 and that he was good for that debt. So that was Joseph's one lawsuit in Pennsylvania, that $86 he owed to the storekeeper. So Pennsylvania never arrested him, never threw him in jail. That was his protective place. And this, that's not the reason I like this document, though. The reason I like this document is it shows that Joseph was focused on his mission of translating the plates. He may have much preferred to have a full-time job and show his father-in-law, hey, I can work. I'm a hard worker. I can make money. I can pay off this property, no problem. But he borrowed money because he had to translate the plates. He couldn't do both. So there is no record that Joseph was arrested, detained, imprisoned, or tried while in Harmony. So it was really a unique place for him to accomplish some of the most important works of the restoration of the gospel. It wasn't only a protective place for him to do these, to translate the plates and to receive the priesthood. He also learned some important lessons as a prophet of God. He received 15 revelations while he was in Harmony. And these are some of the most significant revelations. The first official revelation, D&C 3, D&C 4, for his dad being called to missionary work. And then D&C 25, Emma being called as an elect lady, and to compile the first hymn book for the church. Some of these really significant revelations he received here. And I'm not going to get into all these today, but he also learned some really important principles that helped him become the prophet he became. And President Nelson talked about this in his dedication of Harmony. He said, this is a place that allowed Joseph to mature into a prophet of God. So some of the things he learned to ask. He had to ask all the time. It wasn't God just funneling two things to him. I mean, he had to ask which church to join. He had to ask about the priesthood. He had to just continually asking God. He had to rely on others. He could not do it himself. He learned to receive official revelations. That he mastered the art of receiving a revelation from God in Harmony. And he overcame weakness. This treasure digging thing was a weakness of him, and he triumphed over it. And he used his skill as a seer to translate the plates instead of looking for treasure. And then he learned to fear God more than man. And I think that Isaac Hale installment contract shows that he was focused on his mission. So today, the Priesthood Restoration Site is a testimony to all of us, if you go there, that God inspires prophets and prepares the way for them to accomplish his work. President Nelson said, how thankful we are for these historical events and for the supernal significance of revelation, scriptures, restoration of the priesthood authority, and baptism, all of which unfolded here in Harmony in these relatively remote but sacred and serene locations. For tomorrow, I left one thing out today, and I'll tell you it tomorrow, but there's one kind of flaw in everything I shared with you. It's if Pennsylvania was protecting Joseph, why did he have to go to Fayette? Like, couldn't he have just stayed there? I have the answer to that. It took me a while to figure it out, but I have a really good answer to that. I'll share with you tomorrow. Also, tomorrow we're going to discuss the inspired principles of the U.S. Constitution, what President Oaks told us in his April 2021 talk. And we'll also talk about President Benson's book, The Constitution of the Heavenly Banner. So thank you for coming today.